Welcome to the Understand Photography Show, where we talk about travel, nature, and fine art photography. I'm Peggy Farron. Today we're going to be talking about landscape photography with Matt Payne, who also has his own podcast. So we'll talk about that in a minute. If you haven't been to our website in a long time, it's understandphotography.com, and you'll see right when you get to the first page, it says click here for freebies. Click there and you have a choice of different things. We have essential travel tips, what kind of camera should I buy, how to have tack sharp images every time. That's a really important one. Anyway, you'll be put on our mailing list. You'll have to put in your email address. You'll be put on our mailing list as soon as you go to our website. And also that's where we keep the show notes. So every show has just the highlights typed up with links. It's really, really a full website. So check it out, understandphotography.com. Also on the internet, we have two different Facebook groups. So if you go to facebook.com/understandphotography, it says, I think down at the bottom left, groups. We have a group called Selling Your Photography as Art. So if you're interested in selling your artwork, that's what this group is all about. We talk about art shows and licensing and galleries and honing your niche, all kinds of different things in that group. The other group is a more general group. It's just called the Understand Photography Group. There you can ask questions on different equipment you want to buy. We have monochrome Mondays and whatever Wednesdays where people share pictures. Ask any kind of questions you want there. So that's facebook.com/understandphotography. My guest today is Matt Payne. Now, Matt is a fascinating young man. He's a mountain climber. I guess I don't really know that many mountain climbers, especially since I live in Florida. But Matt has climbed all 53 of Colorado's 14,000 feet peaks and all 100 of its highest mountains. He is into this. He's a nature and landscape photographer. He's an instructor, conservationist, and he has his own podcast called F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. So welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
So Matt, tell us the short version of your biography as it pertains to photography.
Well, gosh, I got my start as a photographer through mountain climbing. I was really into mountain climbing back in the kind of late 2000s, and I picked up a camera, and the more and more, I just wanted to take pictures of my adventures and mountain climbs and share them with my friends and family. And the more I did that, the more interested I got into photography, and decided to basically check out every photography book in the library I could find, and bought a DSLR and just started experimenting and having fun with it. So totally self-taught, and just love to share kind of the natural world with people and the crazy places that I'm able to see on my adventures.
That's awesome. Yeah, photography is very addicting.
Yeah, it can be for sure.
So now you mostly do landscape photography, correct?
Correct. Nature and landscape photography, although, I've shot weddings, I've done portraiture, I've done a couple of architecture gigs. I can do anything, but I prefer nature and landscape. It doesn't feel like work.
Yeah, I agree. I love it. I was trained as a portrait photographer, and then 11 years ago I started teaching, and all my students were nature photographers. So I thought, well, I better learn something about nature photography.
Better figure this out.
And I'm a city girl, and I never dreamed in a million years I'd be out there in the swamp up to my waist and with alligators and snakes, and I like it. I love it, actually, and I like taking the pictures, and so I wish I would have started earlier, but I didn't know what I didn't know.
You guys got some beautiful landscapes in the Everglades there. It's
Oh,
definitely it's on my list of places I want to visit. So,
well, I'll tell you, the summer is the best time to come for landscape photography because our clouds are they're just amazing.
right.
So now your landscapes photography is pretty amazing, and you do go to really cool places. You go
I
to
try
more
to.
cool places than most people, I would say.
I mean, I definitely try to. I'm lucky in that I grew up climbing mountains here in Colorado. I climbed my first mountain when I was 4 with my dad. So I don't know, like I just I'm just lucky that that's kind of where I grew up and what I know, and it's just what I'm drawn to photograph, and I feel at home up in the mountains. So it's I feel lucky.
All right, let me ask you this. Now you're taking pictures while you're up on a mountain. What kind of gear are you carrying? Because photography gear can get heavy.
Yeah, so uh when I first got into it, I was carrying like the Nikon D800 and the Holy Trinity. So I was carrying the 14 to 24, the 24 to 70, 70 to 200. It's pretty heavy with a pretty heavy tripod too. Now I've lightened my kit a little bit. I shoot Sony mirrorless. I shoot the A7R II, and then I have kind of a variety of lenses depending on the trip. But it's still probably about 8 or 9 pounds worth of gear plus a tripod, so it still can be pretty heavy. um, but that's why I go to the gym and train. So
Yes, so you can keep up your photography addiction.
pretty much, yeah, exactly.
What kind of
Yep.
tripod? Did you get a lightweight tripod?
Yeah, right now I'm using a Fisol. It's a Fisol Tournament 3442. I don't make it anymore, but I also have a really lightweight ball head. It's a Photoclam Pro QR2, I think is what it's called. It's super light, but really sturdy. Um, yeah,
Oh,
that's
that's
pretty
good to
much my
know.
go-to.
I can't believe you knew the numbers off the top of your head. I'm
Yeah,
pretty impressed with
I've
that.
written like a lot of articles about my gear before, so it's just embedded in my brain, I guess. I don't know.
And we'll put a link. Well, we'll put a link to whatever your gear, or if you have a page where you list your gear, we'll do
I
that.
do. Yeah, it's on my website.
Okay. So now you are really good about using light in your landscapes. Is that, are you just at the right place at the right time? Are you doing some of that in processing?
I would say a little bit of both. I'm pretty obsessed with light, especially as it pertains to mountains. There is really nothing more amazing than being on the top of a 14,000 or 13,800 foot mountain at sunrise or sunset and seeing the tops of the mountains just start to glow red, um, and the clouds starting to turn pink and orange and get purple. It's just insane. So I'm addicted to that for sure. So I try to put myself in those kinds of situations as much as I can, and when I can't, I try to look for different ways to harness different types of light, whether that be bounce light off the atmosphere, or if there's no clouds, then I wait for maybe some blue hour light, which I really like to shoot in. Um, and so, that casts like a really kind of soft, kind of blue light on the landscape with subtle shadows and things of that nature. So, yeah, I think light's almost everything when it comes to landscape photography. If you don't have interesting light, it becomes very difficult to photograph your subject in a way that's not either boring or harsh. So yeah, I think light's almost everything when it comes to landscape. And the next important thing is composition, but
So
definitely
what
lights.
do you mean when you say bounce the light?
Yeah, so I don't know if you've ever experienced, have you ever gone photographing like way after sunset, like an hour after sunset, and the sun has set behind over the horizon, and it's maybe hitting the atmosphere? When the sun is at that angle, the light can actually bounce off of the atmosphere back down onto the landscape. It's a lot more subtle with your naked eye than it is with a camera at a longer exposure, but you can definitely pick up like reds and blues and purples on the ground and like really soft shadows. It's one of my favorite times to photograph. Just it like true alpenglow is that kind of light where it's bouncing off of the atmosphere and just casting a very subtle light on the mountain peaks. So that's my favorite kind of light, actually.
Okay, hold on. I got to get my mind around this because this is a new thing for me. Is this
Yeah,
just,
definitely.
why is it so new to me? Why haven't I never heard this before? Is it only in the mountains? Do I not bounce here
I
in
think
Florida?
it's yeah. I mean, if you don't have if you don't have a subject that's higher than kind of ground level, I think it's very hard to see it. It definitely shows up in the desert a lot too. Like if you have sandstone, it can definitely pick up those reds and purples from the just kind of that blue hour light. Um,
So you're talking
yeah,
about how long after sunset? And I mean, I know it's not
about
exact.
like about an hour, half
A
hour to an hour.
full hour?
Yeah, I mean, it's called the blue hour.
The blue hour, but it's blue. It's not, I know, I don't see the reds and the oranges, I guess, that you were talking about an hour.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely need it's not going to happen every day, every time, but you need specific conditions. It helps if you have high clouds that the light can also bounce off of. But I could Google it, but basically what happens from what I understand is that um, the wavelength of light that hits the atmosphere, I think it
Okay.
filters out all of the reds and it bounces it back down.
It's
But
fascinating to me. Just I like learning new things.
yeah,
I'm gonna have to look into that a little bit more because it's just something I just haven't
and
heard that
I'm
much
sure
about.
somebody who knows more about the science behind that's probably rolling their eyes at me right now, but it's definitely
Well, yeah, but people who know the science sometimes you can't understand what they're talking about.
right, right, right.
All right, so the blue hour and the whatever that is called that you're talking about, the bounced atmospheric
I don't
light
know. We call it glow. I mean,
glow,
yeah.
but not like the afterglow after a sunset. That's not what you're talking about, is it?
Sometimes,
Because I mean,
but a
we
little bit
have
later.
amazing afterglow, but by the time the blue hour, it's just blue. It's no,
Yeah, I
there's
think it
no.
just depends on the time of year, kind of where the clouds are, the intensity of the light. Sometimes I don't know if you ever witnessed a sunset that just keeps going and going and going, like an hour and a half after the sun goes down. That's the kind of light that I'm talking about, where
Okay.
it just keeps going and I
I
don't know,
wouldn't
you
know
can see
about
the
that
glow.
long, but yeah, but in the summer, remember I told you how beautiful our clouds are in the summer? The sunsets are to die for here in the summer because of that. The afterglow is what we call it, but it doesn't last that long. Maybe
Yeah, I think it also depends on like
45
where
minutes.
you are in the on the
Oh,
globe,
I bet
right?
you're
Like I think if you're further north in the latitudes, I think there's a stronger effect of this. Or obviously like
ah.
the closer you are to the poles, I think you get a little bit more effect like that.
This is interesting. I'll have to look this up now. All right, so the blue hour and the glow, sunrise, sunset, those are your favorite times. You said
Definitely.
clouds.
Love clouds. But I'll take anything, honestly. I actually kind of enjoy the challenge of shooting at any time of the day, looking for shaded areas where you can have just slight shadow, or maybe work on more intimate scenes with a macro lens or a telephoto. So I'll take any kind of light, but I mean they're all different. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know what I did? I had an old camera converted to digital infrared so I could take pictures in the middle of the day, and I love that look. But,
yeah,
you
that's
know,
pretty cool.
it's because it's sunny here a lot.
Right.
So,
Although, I mean, like if you're in the swamps and stuff, like when we're here, like here in Colorado, if you get into the trees and the forest, I mean, you still can have a lot of shade
mhm.
and also you can get kind of, that kind of diffused light that's coming through the canopy of the trees. So, I mean, honestly, you just gotta think about the way the light's gonna work. I mean, I know that sounds really easy, but
No, no, you're right.
or
That's what
simple.
photography is all about. So you say the next thing you said was composition was important. Do you have any uh, composition tips on landscape photography?
Definitely. So, I mean, one of the lessons I've learned over the years is it's more important what you leave out than what you leave in. Um, Early on, I had a real tendency to just try to get everything I could in the scene, shoot super wide and or do lots and lots of panoramics that just had everything I could see in the shot. And I think it's harder to think about what are the most important elements to include in your photograph that accentuate the composition or accentuate your subject in a way that's pleasing or that draws your eye through the scene, whether that be an S curve or diagonal lines or shapes and textures. So I think it's important to think about what to leave in versus what to leave out.
Okay. So you're saying simple, keep it simple, basically, or not?
Sometimes that can help a lot in terms of, especially if you're looking at a scene and you're like, oh, there's so much stuff going on here, like in a forest or something. It's hard to think about God, what is even the subject here? And so if you start looking for maybe smaller, tighter, like telephoto scenes where you can maybe just have a fewer number of elements in the scene, I think sometimes that can help make it a little bit more pleasing to the eye.
Yeah, yeah. Now, because you're a mountain climber, which is something I'm not familiar with in any way, um, you are using some long lenses to compress your hills and things like that. That's the way it looks in your pictures. I don't know. I'm guessing.
Yeah, I'd say sometimes yes, sometimes no. It just depends on the scene and what my subject is. So if I'm photographing a mountain that's maybe in the distance, like 10 or 15 miles away, and there's maybe layers of mountains or forests in between there, here and there, I might use a telephoto to kind of pull out some of those layers. But I think typically I'm looking more around like the 24 to 50 range millimeter wise
Right.
to,
Okay.
yeah, that's kind of the sweet spot for me in terms of some of those scenes. Although I do, like I said, it just depends on the scene, but I really like shooting wide angle too. So, if you have like really interesting stuff in the foreground, whether that be like different rocks or mossy rocks or jagged rocks in the foreground or whatever, maybe the sun's kind of side lighting some of those rocks and making them interesting. It's really nice to get a wide angle lens and get kind of lower to the ground to kind of accentuate some of that too. So it just depends on kind of what the scene calls for.
So if you have like interesting rocks with moss and cool lighting, you're going to say, okay, I'm going to use my wide lens. I'm going to get down low. Now what happens? That rock is now big in the picture. Am I right?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, you have to be mindful about how much emphasis you want that part of your subjects to be. So I think it just depends on how interesting the foreground is, as opposed to maybe how interesting the stuff is in the background or in the midground. So I think those are important compositional things to think about when you're approaching a scene like that. And it might change the way you think about what focal length to use. So you might want to still include those rocks in the foreground, but put more emphasis in the background. So you might use a slightly less wide angle, like maybe 24 or 35. And maybe shoot from a little bit higher. So it just depends on kind of what you want to emphasize and which elements uh, look more pleasing to you, I guess is the way I would put it.
That would be a really good exercise if you did find that nice scene with the pretty rocks in the foreground or whatever. Just try to take that picture with different lenses and see what comes out. See what you like. That sounds like
Yeah,
it'd be a great exercise, except then you got to change lenses out in the dust or wherever you are.
yeah, that happens.
It happens. Do you change lenses a lot out in the field?
Yeah, quite a bit actually. Yeah, unfortunately, which is I hate it because every time you change lenses, you're risking whether dust or water or like you risk dropping a lens. Like it's just I have to be super careful. So it's not my
Yeah.
favorite thing, but I'd
But
rather
it's
do
better
that
than
than miss a
carrying
shot.
all the, yeah, and it's better than carrying a bunch of gear because, when I used to do weddings, I would keep two heavy cameras with two heavy lenses on either. That's why I got these big shoulders, man. Carrying that stuff for all these years, it was so
Yeah.
heavy. I don't want to carry it while I'm out, hiking or something.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so, and when you post process, are you adding light too in post processing?
Not typically.
No.
I
Okay.
typically what I'm doing is I'm accentuating the light that I want to I want the viewer to focus on. So typically the way that works for me is I'm using a lot of luminosity masks, and I'm also using a lot of dodge burn layers. Typically those are the main techniques that I'm using to kind of emphasize light or de-emphasize parts of the photo that I don't want the eye to view as much.
Okay. And do you spend a lot of time processing?
I spend a lot less time than many people that I know, but I would say on average, for a single photo that's not like a panoramic, I'm probably spending anywhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours to get it dialed in. And you know, there becomes a point in time where it's good enough. Like I mean, honestly, you could edit a photo for hours and hours and hours and hours, and you might make incremental gains, but I can almost promise that almost nobody's going to notice. Um, I know that's not a popular view, but
You know what?
my
I
time
learned
is
that one the hard
important.
way.
I don't have a ton of time. I have a full-time job plus my podcast that I release weekly, plus photography, plus like I have a 11-year-old son and I have a dog, and yeah, I don't have time to spend 300 hours in front of the computer. So
And I don't want to. Of course, I still am doing portraits and events, and phew, I miss the days where I just mailed the film away and it came back and I handed it to the customer. It was so much
right.
easier. It's so much
hmm
more work now that I get
Although I
to.
will say with like event coverage and even some portraiture, uh, what I love is like using Lightroom and just you know doing a lot of like applying basic adjustments and then tweaking the kind of getting every photo like 75% there. You just applying basic settings and then just going through and quickly re-editing and fixing it up. So there's ways around that, I feel like, especially for stuff like that, but I don't know. You can't really do that as much in landscape.
Yeah, I don't spend a lot of time editing on my unless if somebody orders prints, I'm going to retouch it, but
Sure,
I
of
don't
course.
I don't retouch my pictures, but it's still even without retouching, if just going through Lightroom, just even with presets, just straightening a few horizons or whatever
Right.
else you need to do, it's still more time consuming than sticking it in an envelope and sending it to the lab.
Right. It's like people are always like, man, why do you charge so much money for a portrait shoot or a wedding? And it's like, well, you only see the time that I'm there shooting. You don't see all the time I'm behind the camera. You don't see all the time I'm spending talking to the print lab. I mean, time is money, and you got to value your time.
Yeah, I
At least
agree.
I do. I value my time personally. So,
Yeah, well, it sounds like you have a lot on your plate. Now, do you do a lot of slow shutter speed, long
yeah, I mean,
exposures?
definitely do a lot of long exposures for blue hour and my night photography. I do a lot of stars and Milky Way type photographs. So yeah, I'm doing a lot of stuff in the 15 to 25-second range for sure. But if it's golden hour, you're looking at 10 seconds max at a
Max.
at a low ISO typically.
Okay,
I don't
okay.
do a lot of I'd like to. It's just I always feel like I'm gonna miss the shot if I use like a neutral density filter to blur the clouds out and stuff. I don't know. It's risky. So I don't do a
I,
lot of
I
that.
I interviewed someone recently, and I can picture his face. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he does a lot of really long exposures because he likes the clouds all
Right.
super, super mushy, and it's such a cool look. But he said it's like 10 minutes in exposure.
For
I don't
sure.
know if I have that kind of patience, you know?
Yeah, I've done a few of those for sure. I think my biggest fear is just like, oh, I overexposed or I underexposed, and then you just lost that whole time. I mean, unless you have two cameras or something, but I don't
Yeah,
know.
but still, I get it. I get it. Believe me. So, all right. So tell us about naturefirstphotography.org.
Sure, I'd love to. So, a small group of us landscape and nature photographers here in Colorado. Um, a couple years ago, we started just noticing an increased trend of various locations that we enjoy photographing become damaged by visitation numbers, by people that maybe for whatever reason didn't necessarily have any ethics or outdoor education in terms of what to how to treat the environment or how to approach a scene in order to minimize impact from visitation, maybe no leave no trace background or experience. And obviously, we've also seen a huge increase of visitation to various locations because of social media and geotagging. And so instead of complaining about it, we decided that we wanted to do something positive about it. So we met, and over the course of about a year, it took us some time, but we developed what we call the 7 principles of nature first photography. And it's essentially 7 principles to follow in order to minimize our impact as photographers on the places that we love to photograph. So it's kind of taking the leave no trace principles kind of to the next level and more focused around how you think about it from a photography perspective.
So, what are the 7 principles?
Oh, you're gonna test me, huh?
Oh
Okay, cool.
no, I just thought you would
Well,
know
I
them.
don't have them memorized. I should, but I don't.
But leave no trace. What's the difference between what this group is doing and leave no trace?
So we include the leave no trace principles as one of our principles, but leave no trace is kind of just more specific to um, generally kind of how you approach wilderness areas is kind of what it was designed to do, and this is more just how you approach nature and landscape photography from more of a general ethical perspective.
Okay.
So the nature first principles are, the first one is prioritize the well-being of nature over photography. And kind of the premise behind that, we've seen a lot of people in the field, you know, oh, if I just walk through the patch of wildflowers or if I jump over that private property fence, I'm going to get a much better photograph. And what this principle says is to prioritize the well-being of nature over your desire to get the shot. The second principle is to educate yourself about the places you photograph. And the idea of that is basically feel like the more curious you are about the locations that you travel to, the more you're going to know about how to engage with that place and treat it with respect and not damage that location. Um, the third one is to reflect on the possible impact of your actions. And kind of the classic one of that is, people that create kind of, side trails or smaller trails on the side of main trails. And what people have seen with that is, if one person does it, it's no big deal. But what happens when the 7 people behind you start to follow you, and then the hundreds behind them, and it has like a cumulative effect. And before you know it, there's a whole giant trail that's just got opened up that leads people to a place that can't handle that kind of traffic.
Yeah.
The fourth principle is to use discretion if sharing locations. There's a lot of people that like to geotag and name various locations, which unfortunately what we've seen is larger social media accounts sharing locations can have a huge impact on that specific location, having a huge spike in visitation. Kind of the most classic example of that is this last summer in the nature preserves in California with the poppy fields. Huge numbers of people started flocking to those places, and you could actually see people would take drone footage kind of before and after, and the place just got completely decimated due to geotagging. So it's just thinking before you share the location of a place.
Okay.
The fifth principle is to know and follow rules and regulations, which I feel like kind of is kind of self-explanatory, like follow the rules and don't break the law. But you'd be surprised at how many people don't do that, and it causes all kinds of problems for the rest of us.
Actually, I
Um,
have, after you finish, I'm going to go back to that one because I would like to talk about that for a minute. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah, definitely. The sixth one is to always follow leave no trace principles and strive to leave places better than you found them. And then the seventh is to actively promote and educate others about these principles.
I like it. That's
Yeah.
nice. I I have a thing. I don't know what the word is, but I as a lot of workshop leaders do, pay some pretty expensive permit fees. And for Everglades National Park, there are only 2 photographers who have the permit to do workshops. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of photographers doing workshops in Everglades National Park.
Illegally.
Yeah, but part of the problem is the permits are crazy expensive.
Sure.
They're designed for the people who are bringing bus loads, and
Right,
most
right,
photographers are bringing 1 to 4 people.
right,
So they can't make enough money to cover these ridiculous
right, right,
permits. So the permits are not solving the problem. If you want to solve the problem of knowing how many people are doing this and managing it, then you have to make it reasonable for the people who are doing it, or they're just going to ignore the rules and regulations, which is
totally.
exactly what's happening. And I'm sure it's not just here.
Oh
I
no, it's
mean,
not. I mean, BLM has some interesting rules as well, depending on where you're at. A friend of mine was trying to get a permit to shoot a shoot for the Wilderness Society over in Bears Ears National Monument, and the way their permit system is set up, it's kind of designed like you're saying for like these huge film crews of people shooting movies and stuff like that. And I think it was what he was quoted was just some ridiculously outlandish fee and he's just one person that wanted to like go in there and shoot a couple scenes, right? Um, but ironically, the fee if you wanted to graze cattle there was like 10 cents per head of cattle or something like that. And so yeah, I mean unfortunately the people that are regulating these and creating some of these rules, like for starters, I don't think they fully understand the audience, and the people that are actually wanting these things. But I think they're also just completely understaffed and underfunded and don't really have the manpower to really think about how to do it in a more logical way.
that's probably true. We're just getting more and more around here, like because there's state preserves and national preserves, and like right around here we've got Fakahatchee, we've got 10,000 Islands, which is I don't know if that's national. Fakahatchee is, I think, that might just be local. Big Cypress, Everglades, and they all want like over $1,000 for each
Right,
one. And it's crazy. Nobody can afford that unless you're bringing hordes and hordes of people in there. And is that what they
right,
want? It doesn't
right.
make any sense.
It doesn't. And the other thing is, I think there's a logical argument to be made around not creating or not making certain places a national monument or a national park. I mean, I'm a huge conservationist and environmentalist, and I like the places that I love to photograph. I want to see those places preserved as wilderness for an eternity. But once you label a place a national monument or national park, it's going to automatically draw lots and lots of more visitors, and I don't particularly want that either. So I think it's a really challenging problem that we have in terms of managing our land and our natural resources in a way that makes sense in terms of protecting it, but also making it accessible for people. So I don't envy the job that the National Park Service and the land managers have. I mean, it's a very difficult task.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
It's a tough balance to strike.
All right. So what's the website again? Nature.
Naturefirstphotography.org.
And how much does it cost to join?
It costs nothing to join.
Nothing. Who's paying the web guy?
We're all kind of just pitching in, the founders. Yeah. One of the founders is the web guy, so.
I'm just curious because it's, websites are expensive.
Yeah, I mean, we're as a leadership team, we're kind of working on ways to kind of put more structure around the organization, and eventually we'll have ways to not monetize, but to sustain the movement.
Fundraise.
So
Yeah, you're gonna need some money. You're gonna need money eventually. People get tired, you know.
absolutely.
So now tell us about your podcast.
Sure. So the name of my podcast is F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. Um, I can take absolutely no credit for the name of the podcast. That was all my wife. She cleverly came up with it. And if, for people that are maybe younger, don't know the reference to the Vanilla Ice song, but F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. If that
Every time
rings a bell.
it does to
So.
me.
But yeah, so I don't know, like a couple years ago, it just kind of struck me one day that I thought it would be a really fun project to start a podcast about landscape photography. And I wanted it to be less about kind of gear and technique and things like that. And I wanted it to be more about kind of what motivates different photographers, like how do people approach photography? How do they think about the business side of photography? Um, how do people think about, all these topics we're talking about, like land preservation and kind of the sticky issue of geotagging. And so, we don't spend a ton of time talking about gear and stuff like that. It's more about, almost like psychological issues that are relating to photography and landscape photography. So it's been a lot of fun so far, and I release one episode a week, so it's a lot of work. I spend about, I don't know, 15 to 20 hours a week working on the project.
That's about how long it takes us, about 15 to 20 hours a week to do this. Okay, so let's talk about post-processing. Now, you said you don't spend a lot of time, but on the other hand, you said 30 minutes to 2 hours. To me, that sounds like a lot of time. So what are some of the things you do? Do you change the look of your picture?
Yeah, so my goal is always to try to present a photograph in a tasteful way that kind of represents the experience that I had in nature as the person who experienced it and photographed it. Obviously, in order to also make a photograph more pleasing to the eye or interesting, I might be making minor adjustments to color balance or accentuating different colors or changing the hue slightly of various colors in order to, work on the color wheel and things of that nature. But for the most part, I'm trying to really give somebody a representation of what that experience was like. And that's always been my goal as a photographer, at least for the last couple of years. I think early on, I was all about trying to make the most ridiculous, dramatic looking image I possibly could. And I have some pretty horribly edited photos from 2011 and 2012 that I could show you that you'd be like, ooh, that's disgusting. But, I think it's interesting because there's kind of a schism in the world of landscape photographers where I feel like you're either on one side of the fence or the other, or kind of a little bit in between. But there's a lot of people that feel like when it comes to landscape photography as an art form, and I put that in air quotes, as an art form, because there's debate of whether or not it's even an art form or not, that if it's an art, anything goes. Like, do whatever you want. Drop a moon in there, drop a Milky Way from a different part of the world in the scene, completely change the colors to be totally different. Photoshop in birds that weren't there or plants that weren't there. Or, like there's all kinds of stuff people do to get these really dreamy, magical, fantastical landscape images that people drool over and go crazy over online. And I think to the kind of common person that's not a photographer that's in it day to day, they really can't tell the difference between that and an image that is based on a real experience that required someone to be in the right place at the right time and perhaps had to go back to that place over and over and over again to get the light and the clouds and things like that they needed in order to make that image come to life. which obviously takes a lot more work than to just copy and paste different stuff into your photograph, which I think where a lot of the division comes in terms of people kind of being upset at the other camp because they just created it out of nothing, whereas the other camp, put in the hard work and the physical work and, has hundreds of photographs that are awful and then the one that finally panned out.
Yeah.
So, and my
degree of difficulty, in the professional photographers, in competition, that's one of the things is degree of difficulty.
Sure.
Because putting a moon behind something in Photoshop is a lot easier than getting there at the right time in the right place and the right conditions.
And I'll say for myself, I've kind of been on both sides of this debate over the years. When I first started out, I was kind of in the camp that like, man, anything goes, like drop a moon right there, that's fine. And what I came to realize, at least for myself, is that the images that I had kind of manufactured in the digital darkroom, so to speak, that were artistic creations, they just did not resonate for me personally as a photographer and as an artist. Like it did not speak to me, did not speak to my experience. It did not feel like it was an authentic representation of nature. And I started to feel like that was cheapening my work. And also the work of other people. I feel like that's kind of the other thing. Like for the mass public, the mass appeal of these fantastical images has become so great that people have kind of lost an appetite or an appreciation for the images that are actually real. And when I say real, I mean true to experience. So I think it's an interesting conundrum that we face as landscape photographers, where you kind of have to make a personal choice of what kind of side of the fence you're on. And I feel like at the end of the day, you need to be willing to stand up for what you believe in ethically. Like if you are going to do those things, you need to be able to justify that somehow. And I know a lot of people, the way they justify it is it's art and anything goes. And that's that. And that just doesn't sit right with me personally. I can't fully articulate why I feel that way. I guess it's because of the hours and hours and hours and hours of work I put into getting the shots.
Say because you know how hard it is to get that in real life. That's why it bothers you.
I think that's part of it for sure. And I think the other part of it for me is that I've been victim to seeing a photograph that I thought was freaking amazing, like the Milky Way and the way it lined up with various elements in the foreground. And then you go to that location, you spend the hours and the weeks to get to that place and get there, and then you realize that it was just created in Photoshop and that it's not even possible to experience that. Right. And I think that's the other piece of it too, is that when you do those kinds of things in Photoshop, you are fooling people into believing that that's something that they also can experience when they can't. And I don't think that's right.
That's a good point. I never thought about it that way, because I'm kind of, it's interesting because I am not a purist. However, you would think I am from my photography, because I never, ever do anything like super creative like that unless it comes out of the camera. But I like your argument just there, because usually I think, well, what's the difference? It's pretty.
Right. I mean, I think that's what a lot of people say. Like, who cares? Like, the end result is all that matters when it comes to art. And I say, yes. And you can achieve those same results and still have an artistic image without doing that.
Maybe. Just like you said, it's deceiving somebody to thinking they could ever see a moon that big behind a lighthouse or whatever, these beautiful shots you see that probably aren't real.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately I'm kind of cursed in that I'm really good at spotting that stuff too. Like when I look at photos online, I'm like, nope, that's not right. you know, like I can't help it. Like
that is a curse. You know, when I first started doing weddings, I was doing videos as well as photography. I couldn't even watch TV for a while because I would be critiquing the videography, you know.
Right. Like, oh, that's not right.
It's like, why don't they use a tripod? Come on, you know?
Right.
Don't they
Yeah.
know the rule of thirds? I don't know. I just
And the one that really is hard for me to swallow is I see photographers that go to some of the same places that I've been that I have a real deep connection to emotionally and as a photographer and also as a lover of nature and of those places. And then they distort the scene by warping the mountains and adding things that I know don't exist. And that drives me crazy because I'm like, man, like that place does not look that way. Stop. That's also part of it for me is like my connection to these places and I see how people are trying to represent them through art and I'm like that's not right. It just doesn't feel right to me. But at the end of the day, like do what you're gonna do, but know that there's a lot of people that look at it and go, that doesn't look right.
yeah, it's interesting. I know
And
one
maybe
of
you're okay
my
with that. I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. I don't have strong feelings either way.
Sure.
I think some people do. I know who was it? Was it Peter Lick who had that?
Oh yeah,
Is
that
that
fake
the
moon.
Yeah, boy,
Hmm.
people got really upset about that. And I guess I didn't understand why they got so upset. It
Well,
just
it's I think it's because of the way he represents it
oh,
on his
he's
website
coming
and
off.
also in the gallery. I've heard stories of people that have gone into his gallery and they'll ask the person there like, and they'll tell him this bullshit story that's not true about how it was a real experience and it's not. It was totally just manufactured digitally. So I think that's the other thing too. Like you're purposely
Well,
lying to
yeah,
people. So
need to be honest. Jim Zuckerman he was a guest on my show and he's an amazing photographer, but boy, I'll tell you what, he swaps out the sky on 90% of his pictures, I think, but he teaches you how to do it as he's showing you what he did.
sure,
He's not hiding it.
right,
He's telling you all these different things he's doing when
sure,
he's quite honest about it. And he's amazing with Photoshop. You just wouldn't know. And I know I had a graphic artists teach a class at Understand Photography, and I learned so much about like how to, he would take all these different elements and put them together and talk about the shadowing and the lighting and it
sure.
was just so fascinating. The stuff that he did looked so real.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't mean to downplay like that stuff. If it's done well, it takes a tremendous amount of talent and skills to do it. And honestly, if you're honest about it, I don't care. I just, I think at the end of the day, like we have to somehow, um, I don't know if it's like categorizing it differently, if that's needed, or like one's like photo illustration and the other is landscape photography. Like they're very different art forms, and it just happens to be that they're both rooted in the taking of pictures, but one is also like adding elements digitally that perhaps weren't there. So um,
Well,
I don't
the
know.
same thing. I'm talking again about the Professional Photographers of America, the PPA competitions. It is a separate category, a totally separate
As it
category.
should
If
be,
you
I
swap a
think.
sky or whatever, and you have to show the different pictures that you merge together.
No, I like that. I mean,
Yeah,
go for it. Knock
yeah.
yourself out,
It's
like
it's pretty amazing the things people can do. But I get what you're saying too. Especially if it's done and you know what? You should if you feel the need to be dishonest, you have to do some introspection to find out why. You know
exactly.
what I mean? It's like I said with Jim Zuckerman, he just this is how I did it. Looks amazing, but it wasn't real. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, I
he's
think that's
very, very
absolutely
open
right.
about it. So, but
Yeah,
if
I
you
think
have
you're
to
right.
say, oh yeah, I was there, and I know when I first started the show, I was walking. We have a lot of nice art shows here, and I was just walking the art shows and thinking about, I wonder if, talk to these people if they want to be on my show. And one guy, I said, how did you get the colors so vibrant? Oh, he went on to this long nonsense story and it really bothered me because I knew it wasn't true, that he didn't do anything in Photoshop and all this other stuff. And I'm like, okay, but you're right. That bugged the crap out of me because he wasn't honest.
Hmm.
So
And I think that's the thing too, like as a viewer of that art form, right? You kind of want to know like, was this a real experience or not? Because it changes the way you see it, I feel like.
That is a good point. It does. It changes the way you see it. You're either going, wow, that guy has some good Photoshop skills, or wow, that guy's, an amazing photographer. Because
Right.
it's a totally different skill. I mean, there was no Photoshop when I started photography before you were born.
And I guarantee you there's people listening that say, it doesn't matter. Who cares?
Yeah.
So,
That's interesting. All right.
yeah.
So what if you wanted to close out with what are the key points that you think that people, you've got, okay, you're into landscape photography, mountaineering, your new is it new, your organization? I forgot the name of it.
Nature First. Yeah, we launched on Earth Day this year. So,
Oh, that's in October, right?
no, in April.
Oh, April. Okay, sorry. I'm
No, you're
confused.
good.
Okay, so less than a year.
Less than a year. Yep.
All right.
Yeah, and
And
so our goal is by the end of next year to have 10,000 members worldwide.
well, I joined
So,
today.
oh, cool. Thank you. Awesome.
One more towards your 10,000 goal.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, we've had some people on my show have heard this story before, and I didn't read the part on the website yet, but I want to, about what do you say when you see bad behavior?
Hmm.
Because we had a tragedy in my opinion, because we had an iconic landmark in the middle of the Everglades burned down from photographers doing the steel wool
The
photography on
steel
top
wool.
of it,
Uh-huh.
which they were in a camera club. There was a whole group of people, and somebody should have said, hey, you dum-dums, don't do that.
Yeah, like, hey man, this is maybe not a good idea to do this here.
Yeah, so that
I mean, I used to do a steel wool, but I would always do it in a place where there was nothing flammable, you know?
we actually stand in the water when we do it, and go sideways so the sparks go in the water. It's
Absolutely, yeah.
that's you're pretty safe if you're if you
Not gonna light the ocean on fire.
no, not usually.
Maybe in Houston where there's all that oil and
Yeah.
stuff.
I like it. All right, Matt. What's the name of your podcast again?
F-stop, collaborate, and listen.
How do you find that? Is that the
Um,
website?
so you can go to my website, mattpaynephotography.com, and there's a link to podcast. But pretty much in any podcatching, whether it be iTunes or Stitcher or even Pandora or Spotify, if you just search either for my name, Matt Payne, or if you search f-stop or f-stop Collaborate Listen, or even just landscape photography, it should show up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And do you have do you do workshops too?
I do private workshops, like one-on-one,
Okay.
and then I'm also teaching at the Out of Chicago conferences this year.
And when are those?
So Out of Yosemite is February 5th through the 9th. And then Out of Moab, I believe, is like early September. And then Out of Acadia is early October.
Okay. Oh, I
Hmm.
went to Acadia for the first time, not this past summer, but summer before. It was awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited. I've never been myself, so it's going to be an
Oh, you're
amazing
gonna love
experience.
it.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah, I'm
Just like they
excited.
say. Well, thank you for being on the Understand Photography show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Matt, and to the audience, thank you for joining us on the Understand Photography show. Remember, the show notes are at understandphotography.com. This show airs at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Fridays as a podcast on YouTube and on Facebook. I'm Peggy Farron. See you next week.
Get up!